Hey guys, how are you doing? I hope you're doing well. Today we will be building a simple real-time chat application using NestJS, WebSockets and ReactJS. Let's get started. Alrighty, let's jump into coding. First of all, make sure you have installed NestJS globally, and then we can create a new project via the second command here. So I'm here already in my directory where I have all my projects, and I do nest new, and then I say backend.chatapp, for example, hit enter. And then I choose npm because it's my personal preference. And then we can cd into our project directory. Finally, we can do code empty space dot. That will bring up Visual Studio Code, and we are already in the right directory, as you can see here. Next, we have to install some dependencies. You can see them here. Yeah, just this line. Let's copy it, paste it in here, and we are good to go. Now we need to create a gateway, and via this gateway, NestJS is able to establish a WebSocket connection to a front end. So let's create a gateway. We do it via nestg for generate, and then gateway, and we give it a name of just chat, for example. Hit enter. And here is our gateway. That's all we need to establish a WebSocket connection. And since NestJS is very smart, you see in app.module, it has been passed already into the providers array. And since this has been done, everything is connected and is working already. But we need to put in some work in our chat gateway here. So be with me. First of all, we need to provide a port here as argument in the WebSocket gateway decorator. So we can say, for example, 8001. And then also we have to pass in some options. And we do it via providing an object with the key, of course. And we just say string and then asterisk, I think it's called. And we do this here because we want every front-end client to be able to connect with our gateway. If we don't provide this argument here, we will get an course error and we will not be able to establish a WebSocket connection. So this is why we have to provide this argument here. Next, we have to provide a property here called server in our chat gateway. And we need to make use of another decorator called WebSocket server. And this will create an instance of a server. Next, we want to be able to extract the data that has been sent from the front end. We can do it via another decorator called message body. It also comes from NestJS/WebSockets, and we want to extract the message, which is of type string, like this. Nice. And we do not have any second argument here, and we want to return just void, so we do not want to return anything. As you can see here, we have another decorator called subscribe message, and we pass in a string of message. So whenever we emit an event from our front end that is called message, this message here is run. And what we want to do is just simply console.log the message. And then also we want to emit an event by saying this.server emit. And then we want to emit an event called also message. And then we pass in the message as argument. So why we are doing this here has the following reason. Whenever a client sends a message, we want to take this message and send it back to all clients, so that all clients that are connected to our gateway here will receive the message. That's the purpose of this line here. And this message here is always run whenever we emit an event called message from our front end. I think we are good to go now. We can start up the server by saying npm run start :dev, hit enter, and that's it. Our that's it. Our backend should be done. Now let's work on the front end part. I go back into my projects folder, and then I create a new ReactJS application by using Vite. We can say npm init Vite at latest. And since I'm using TypeScript here, I have to provide some additional things here. And then also we have to provide a name for our ReactJS application. I just call it FA for front end chat app, like this. Hit enter and it's done. Let's cd into our ReactJS directory, and then we can do code empty space dot. That will bring up Visual Studio Code in the right directory again. We need one dependency for our ReactJS application, which is this one here. Just copy this line. Then we can do npm run dev. And we see the following here, hello world, which is not correct. We should see something else here after our ReactJS application has been started. Let's go back to our backend. And here we can see that we are also listening on port 3000. And then in our app.service, we are returning hello world. So this is not what we want to see here. We want to see our ReactJS client. And then just change the port here, maybe 3003 or something like this. And now if we are coming back to our tab, we see our running ReactJS application. Yay, nice. We need to create two components. One is called messages.tsx and the other one is called message input. Message input.tsx, and these are all the components that we need. Next, let's go to app.css. We do not need all the styling, but we just can leave the app class here, and we can also say margin top of maybe 200 pixel, like this. Okay. Then we go to our app.tsx and we can delete some stuff. We can just leave the outer div here with the class name of app and delete all the inner things here, like this. Then we want to use useState to change our socket variable here, and we call this set socket. Then we have to import IO and socket from socket.io/client, and then we can provide a type here in angle brackets of socket. So now ReactJS knows that this thing here is of type socket. Let's make use of the useState hook again. We say the useState hook shall return a tuple of a variable called messages and a function called setMessages, which is equal to useState and then parentheses. And this will tell ReactJS the type of this variable here. So here we say it's just an array of strings. Next, let's create a function called send. This function will be triggered whenever we hit the send button. And this function receives an argument value, which is a string. And then all it does is it emits an event called message, and we pass in the value. So if we have a socket instance, an event with the name of message will be emitted whenever we hit the send button. At the moment, socket is always undefined. Let's change this. We can use effect. And useEffect runs a function after the component has been rendered. And we also can pass in some dependencies here. And we want to say, after the component has been rendered, we want to create a new socket, which is equal to IO. And then we just pass in a string, which is the address to our gateway. So we can say http:// and then localhost 8001, was it, I think? Yep, 8001. And it's important to pass in the right port here, right? We want to pass in the port of our gateway and not the port of our server here, of our HTTP server, right? This is very important. Otherwise, this would not work. So we have to pass in the right port here. And then we want to set the socket to this new socket variable like this. And of course, useEffect should depend on setSocket. Next, we have to create a message listener. That's what I call it. And this will be an arrow function, which takes in an argument called message, and it's a string. And this function will be listening for events coming from our NestJS backend. So whenever we emit an event called message from our gateway here, this function will be run. And here we just say that messages, we pass in all the messages that we already got via spread operator. And then we say we want to add a new message. And here we get an error now because messages can be an array of strings or undefined. So let's go back to our useState hook here. And we can say initially it should not be undefined, but it just should be an empty array like this. And the error is gone now. Now that we have our message listener here, we can create another useFact hook here. And here we can provide an array of dependencies. And what we can say now in this function body here of this anonymous function, if we have a socket, then we want to listen for an event called message. And whenever we receive an event called message, we want to run our message listener like this. Beautiful. And then also we can provide a cleanup function here that gets rid of this listener here. So we can say .off message and message listener like this. And then of course we have to provide message listener as dependency here. And then of course we have to provide message listener as dependency here. And then also we get an error here. And this is because we should not return the result of this, but we just should execute this thing here. So nothing should be returned from useEffect like this. Okay, beautiful. Next, we can delete this thing here and we can import our message input component. And also we can wrap this thing in a fragment like this. And we can also import our messages component. Next, let's work on our message input. Here we just can return a fragment. And we can have an input here in our fragment with a placeholder of type your message. And it will have also a value property with a value here. And of course, we do not have any state here in our message input. So let's make use of useState. And we say we want to return a tuple with a variable called value and a function called setValue, like this. And initially, this should be an empty string. Then we also need a button so we can send our messages. And whenever this button is clicked, a function should be run called send. And of course, we have to write it like this because this function will receive an argument, which will be the value. Nice. At the moment, we do not have a variable or a function name called send. So we need to make sure that we pass this variable name in as props here. So we say curly brackets. We want to receive a function called send. And this function is of type arrow function, which returns nothing. This is how you can say it. And then of course we still get an error here because it takes in an argument, a value which is of type string, like this. And the error is gone here. That's all we need to do here in our message input component. Let's go back to app.tsx. We get an error here now because we do not pass anything in as props here to our message input component. So let's say send is equal to curly brackets and we pass in our send function. Like this. Important here, we do not need to call it, right? We just pass it in as a reference and it will be called eventually whenever this button is clicked. Then we call this function. Now we can work on our messages component. We want to be able to pass in all the messages from our state here. At the moment, this component does not take any props. So let's work on it. Here we just can say curly brackets, messages, and messages is of type an array of strings. Like this. Next we can map over all our messages here. Messages.map. We get each message and also the index. And we want to return a new array. So we mutate messages here, and instead of returning a normal message, we want to return a div with a key of index. And then in that div, we want to render the message like this. Yeah, that's it. Now let's see the output. This is what it looks like now, and it does not work. I forgot a few things, so let's work on it. First of all, this button here, it needs a text. So in our message input component, we provide a text here for the button. Maybe something like send. Yep, there we go. And the reason why we cannot type in anything here in this input is because we need to trigger an onChange event. So whenever we type in something, the onChange event on this input is triggered. So we can say here onChange, and then whenever we type in something, we want to run a function that returns that value. And then we pass in e.target.value. And of course, as argument, I need to pass in e here, which is the event object. So what we are saying here, whenever the onChange event on this thing here is triggered, we want to change the value here, right? We want to change the state of our message input. And by doing so, we can finally type in something here. And now let's see what's happening. If we type in something and hit enter, we see it here, right? And this means it's working, right? Because in our app.tsx, we are listening for an event called message coming from our backend. And then we run this function here, which appends each message that's coming from the server to this messages array. Now let's see what's happening if another client connects to our backend. So I open another browser and I go to localhost 3000 and I type something in. Hello, John Doe. Hit enter. This is working nicely. So everything works. Once somebody sends a message, it goes to our gateway. And the gateway sends it back to all connected clients. And this is why both clients are receiving the message. And it gets appended to this messages array, which we have in our app.tsx here, right? And this will be done every time the message listener, and it is called every time the front end receives an event with the name of message. Yeah, guys, congrats. This was your first real-time chat application using NestJS and ReactJS. I hope it was helpful. I'm planning to make a tutorial where I build a complex real-time chat application with a very beautiful design. Here the design was not the most beautiful one, right? It was very basic, but it was not about the design here. It was about to get started quickly and build a simple real-time chat application using NestJS and yeah, WebSockets and ReactJS, of course. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Have a good time. See you in the next video.